Hello! My name is Martijn, and recently I've been playing Frederik Pohl's Gateway, a game for MS-DOS developed and published by Legend Entertainment and released in June 1992. The reason I've been playing this game now is because it's the DOS Game Club Game of the Month. I started DOS Game Club back in 2017 together with my friend Florian. It's like a book club, but for DOS games. Every month we play a different one which we talk about on the forums on our website and in a chat room on IRC. At the end of the month, Florian and I invite some members for a roundtable discussion which we record and publish as a podcast. In preparation for these podcasts, I normally do a little research on the game we're about to discuss, and one of the things I'd like to do is to watch some video reviews on YouTube. But much to my surprise, there aren't any on Gateway. There are a few playthroughs, some videos on the music, things about the novels the game is based on. But that's it. No review, retrospective, post-mortem, nothing. So I figured there's only one thing to do, and that's to make such a video myself. This month was not the first time that I've played Gateway. I've actually played this and the sequel from start to finish many years ago, and I remember I was really impressed by how fun and accessible they are, especially given the fact they are text adventures, which is not a genre known for its low barrier of entry. Now, before I move on, I want to say that I know some people call these games interactive fiction, or even make a distinction between interactive fiction and text adventures by claiming that one is more story-based while the other is more about solving puzzles. And that's fine, but to me it's all the same really. I've always called these games text adventures and that's what I'll do here as well. But if you believe interactive fiction or another term would be more appropriate, please don't be offended and simply imagine that I used your preferred term instead. So, text adventures, huh? Text adventures are among the oldest genres of video games, with the first natural language processing experiments dating back to the 1960s and the first real games emerging in the 1970s. With the release of the hit game Zork in 1980, developer Infocom became one of the dominant text adventure game studios of the time. Throughout the 80s they would release nearly 40 games, but somewhere around 1989 they were shut down by their parent company Activision. A new studio was founded by Bob Bates and Mike Verdu called Legend Entertainment to continue making text adventures into the 90s. Bob Bates was familiar with Infocom because he wrote several text adventures using their engine, which were also published by Infocom. One of these games is Arthur: The Quest for Excalibur, which was one of the very few Infocom games to feature graphics. He also worked on a game based on the science fiction film The Abyss, directed by James Cameron.
The Abyss is an experience like no other.
For this game, they tried to come up with a new user interface, which showed all the possible verbs and items on screen in columns to help the player figure out what to type. Although The Abyss was never released as it got cancelled when Infocom closed down, this interface did serve as the foundation for the new engine Legend Entertainment was developing for their own text adventure games. They hired Steve Maretsky, perhaps the most famous Infocom game designer of all, to help them out with their new studio. Steve's work at Infocom includes such games as 1984's The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, in cooperation with Arthur Douglas Adams himself, and 1985's fantastically pretentious A Mind Forever Voyaging. But it was 1986's risque comedy science fiction game Leather Goddesses of Phobos that served as the foundation for what would become Legend's first game. Spellcasting 101 Sorcerers Get All the Girls is a comedy text adventure game released in October 1990. Unlike Leather Goddesses of Phobos, it has a more magical fantasy setting rather than science fiction, but it is similar in the sense that it's mostly about interacting with sexy women. And although Maretsky personally didn't really like the new user interface, it did become the foundation on which all of Legend's text adventures would be built. 2 more games in the spellcasting series, Time Quest, Eric the Unready, and of course Gateway and its sequel. Legend's engine features some notable updates over the more plain text adventures of the previous generation. The most eye-catching new addition is the inclusion of a picture window, giving the player a sense of what their current location looks like. It's not merely decorative either, as the engine supports pointing and clicking things in the image using the mouse, optionally combined with things from either the verb list or the item list. Fancy stuff! Walking around is equally flexible, as it's possible to either type where you want to go or make use of the on-screen compass rose. You can control most things in this game either fully with the keyboard or fully with the mouse, but mixing them up as you go is probably the most convenient. For hardcore old-school fans, it's possible to hide the user interface entirely and play it as a classic text game, so it really tries to be best of both worlds. So that's how the game works, but what is it about? Let's look at it from the beginning. After a double mention that this game was indeed made by Legend Entertainment, you're presented with this very confident title screen animation to set the tone. You can just feel this is gonna be good. After the title, there is some much appreciated introduction to the story. I didn't know this when I first played it, but I've since learned that Frederik Pohl is actually a renowned science fiction author, and this game is based on a series of his novels. I don't think the game follows any of his novels' plots exactly, but they do lean heavily on their premise and setting, and you definitely benefit from a little explainer before you go on your adventure. What we learn is that people are exploring Venus in the 70s of the 21st century. That's about 50 years from now, 80 from when the game was released, or 100 years from when the first novel came out. Are we actually any closer to exploring Venus now than we were back in the 1970s? I don't know, but we should be halfway there if we want to stick to this timeline. We follow this explorer named Sylvester Macklin and learn he discovers an alien spaceship belonging to a long-lost species known as the Heechee. He messes with the controls a bit and eventually the alien ship takes off and flies home to a nearby Heechee space station. It turns out that the station acts as a sort of alien parking garage and is filled with hundreds of spaceships. He actually gets stranded on the station, but in an act of desperation he manages to signal NASA about his find. It also says the station is located between Venus and Mercury. I'm pretty sure we have the technology to monitor our solar system pretty closely now, let alone 50 years into the future, so I'm not entirely sure why we didn't notice its presence a long time ago. Anyway, it all works out and humanity takes permanent control of the station. Here's when the title comes in. Because it acts as humanity's gateway to the stars, they decide to call the station Gateway. A corporation is founded to control the Gateway station and figure out the Heechee technology. They learn that the ships don't need any manual input from the pilot for navigation. They fly themselves to a location in space based on a 4-symbol code. People start entering random codes, and although sometimes that means they're flown into a black hole or similarly bad things, other times it brings them to planets carrying valuable alien items, which when returned and sold off can turn the explorer into a millionaire overnight. This kicks off a prospecting craze, with lots of folks wanting to try their luck at space artifact roulette. You play as exactly such a person, a gateway prospector. The game explains you won a one-way ticket to the station in a lottery, and thus you get a chance to fly on the first available mission. Now, I'm not sure how I feel about a one-way trip as a prize in a contest, to space or any location for that matter. Maybe it's just me, but not having a way to return home seems a bit final for it to be a prize? It's a double-edged sword at best, or a death trap at worst, I don't know. It doesn't seem like much of a prize to me, but I guess our protagonist doesn't have much to lose, so we're on our way to the stars. The game is split into 3 parts, with the first feeling a bit like a tutorial. There aren't a lot of real puzzles to block your progress in this part, and it's mostly just a matter of following the instructions you receive. If you pay attention to what's going on and apply some common sense, you'll be just fine. This is something I really appreciate about this game, and might be the main reason why I like it so much. Some adventure games like to tease you with a hard puzzle early on, maybe to give you a glimpse of what you'll be up against later. My impression is that some game designers feel they owe it to the player to give them a good challenge, fearing that if it's all too easy, the game won't be worth playing or something. But if this means I get stuck before I'm invested in the story and the characters, it mostly just results in me abandoning the game right there. If for some reason I really insist on playing a game I get stuck in, I might go looking for a walkthrough. And although I don't feel there's any shame in using a walkthrough to allow you to progress, the problem with walkthroughs is that once you start using one, it's really hard to put it down again and go back to solving puzzles yourself. So ideally, you'd want to resort to a walkthrough as late into the game as possible, because once you're using one, there's no going back. You start the game in your quarters after having just arrived on the station. Through a message on your computer, you're told to attend flight training, where you'll be given a blue badge which grants you access to space flights. You're also told to meet Tom Selridge, your mentor or proctor, at the bar. He lets you know that actually blue badges are for cannon fodder, and what you really want is a green badge. These give access to less dangerous and more lucrative missions, but are only available for participants in the Orion program, which is all very prestigious and definitely not open to a new fish like yourself. But you're lucky to learn that your corporate representative, Terry Nielsen, is quite approachable and is a regular at the bar as well. Tom writes a note to introduce you to her, and once you get talking, she agrees to grant you access if you fly a bunch of missions and manage to find and return at least one unique alien artifact. If you didn't want to follow instructions and you spent your time exploring the station and doing random other stuff instead, that's totally fine, because you can just attend flight training and talk to the corporation people in the bar on any following day. And although you can and will die in this game occasionally, it's similarly sympathetic by instead of taunting the player that they should have saved their game earlier, it simply offers an undo button to allow you to take a step back and try again. I must say, unlike a lot of other 90s adventure games, this one is generally really fair to the player, which is great. It's not impossible to get yourself stuck, but you never feel it's the game's intention to trap you. Anyway, back to the story. After talking to Tom and Terry in the bar, we now have our objective. Do some space missions, find an alien object, get a cool green badge instead of a pathetic blue one. There we go. Flying off into space is surprisingly easy with these Heechee vessels. I guess the catch is that you don't know where you're going. I must say, I was quite excited to be exploring space. It felt a bit like being one of those 16th century sailors, taking the plunge into the unknown, discovering the new world and all. I was totally prepared for some epic stuff. This is what actually happened though. Yeah, a little underwhelming. About 15 seconds after liftoff, I was back at the station, having finished my first mission. I guess the more advanced technology gets, the less effort it takes to achieve things, which on the one hand is great, but the convenience does rob you of a sense of fulfillment. You can do a couple more missions like this, but they're mostly a similar letdown, until eventually you come across an alien planet on which you can land. Now we're talking. The first order of business is to check the atmosphere. We learn there is none, so we suit up before heading outside. It's a pretty barren place with little going for it, but I'm still excited. You're on an undiscovered planet somewhere in the depths of space. How can you not be? After walking around a bit, you push a rock which uncovers the entrance to a hidden cave. Inside there's a weird blue room with doors opening seemingly at random. It's a neat medium-level puzzle, which is exactly right for this stage into the game. Not so hard to put you off, but also not so easy you immediately get it right on the first try. Eventually, you get to another room where you can grab an alien box, which is exactly the sort of thing you were looking for. Once you get back to Gateway, you give your representative Terry a call and tell her you've held up your end of the deal. She agrees to meet you and enrolls you into the fancy Orion program, telling you to attend a special meeting the next morning. Once there, you get an introductory talk on how secret and awesome this all is, and your blue badge is swapped for a green one. which unlocks a bunch of new codes allowing you to visit places with a higher chance of success. The way the game is structured is really one of its best features in my opinion. Each planet you visit is its own little world, with the station acting as a central hub to connect them all. The puzzles are all local to each world, and there's almost never the need to get something from one place to solve a puzzle in another. That means you can play most of the game in a non-linear way. If you get stuck on one planet, why not visit another? Try your luck there. You can always come back and try again. If you've played some adventure games, you know it's generally a good strategy to pick up everything the game allows you to and bring it along with you. Fill that inventory to the brim, because maybe you need that flower later. Maybe that stick will come in handy. Who knows? It's the adventurer's way. But of course you don't actually like dragging all those items with you. It's just that you can't be sure if you'll need them or not, so better safe than sorry. With Gateway, however, there's none of that. It doesn't have you carrying around tons of nonsense just in case. In fact, the game actively makes you put your stuff behind when leaving a planet. The hint guide explains that this is done for the player's convenience, and it's this mentality that makes Gateway such a great game to play. It actually cares about giving the player a good time. Let's talk about the presentation a bit, starting with the sound. The audio to this game might seem like nothing too special for a 1992 PC game, and honestly that's true, but the fact a text adventure has audio at all is actually pretty cool. I don't know if any of the Infocom games had that, but I don't think so. All of Legend's text games do have audio, although sadly no speech. There's the occasional sound effect, but most of what you hear is the music. A lot of people seem to really like Gateway's music, and I mostly agree it's pretty solid on its own. I'm a big fan of early 90s DOS game music, whether it's coming out of an OPL FM chip or playing through one of those fancy MIDI boxes. I just like that old school sound. That said, I can't help but feel the music in Gateway is a little disconnected from the game. I don't know, maybe it's me, but these chipper, upbeat tunes don't really instill awe about the vastness of space to me. Something like what they did for the Mass Effect soundtrack would have worked much better in my opinion. But I was only 9 years old when this came out, so they didn't ask me for my input. The graphics in this game are really something else though. Sure, they're in a tiny window the size of a post stamp. They're mostly static too, although there is some occasional animation. And they also only use 16 colors because the game by default runs in the high resolution VGA mode, which doesn't allow more than 16 colors at once. It also supports Super VGA by running the game with the SVGA parameter, but although the resolution is then bumped up to 800 by 600 and this mode would technically allow for more colors, the same 16 color graphics are used. But man, do these graphics get the job done. Not only are they incredibly effective in describing the scene and setting the tone, they also make very clever use of that limited color palette. The art style also fits the game well. This is not some kind of comedy children's game, and the graphics reflect that. There are also some special screens and cutscenes, which, although looking competent enough, they could have used some more sound effects to really make them work. But all in all, this game comes across as pretty polished in both the graphics and audio departments, which is very cool for what is essentially a text-based game. What's kind of interesting is that although the game plays like one continuous story, if you look at the credits, you can see that each part was actually designed by different people. That's because although they had two pretty experienced game writers with Steve Maretsky and Bob Bates, Legend Entertainment wanted to put out more games than they were doing, so they were looking at getting more people into the role of game designer. A bunch of people within the company were interested in trying their hand at actually making games, but it seemed like a big risk to let such inexperienced people write an entire game. That's why they decided to split the work into 3 discrete parts and let different people work on each of them, with Bob Bates overseeing the whole project. This approach was made easier by the fact they used Pohl's Heechee universe setting, so they already had a premise and a setting to work with. Also the way the game is structured, with the station as a central hub and different planets to visit as entirely separate self-contained locations help to make this work. I don't want to spoil the entire story, so if you want to learn more, I urge you to pick up Gateway and check it out for yourself. It's extra easy to get started with this game, because Legend Entertainment released it as freeware back in 1996 through their website. Sadly, the website is no longer online since Legend closed down in 2004, but luckily the Internet Archive still has a copy, so that's cool. The puzzles do get more challenging in the second and third part of the game, but I don't think they ever get completely impossible to solve. It definitely helps that the game is well compartmentalized. And if you do end up getting stuck, know that the game originally came with a hint guide right there in the box, which you can find online as well. Looking up a hint sure beats getting stuck forever, in my opinion. I really enjoyed this game when I first played it many years ago, and I enjoyed it again when I played it for DOS Game Club this month. I think it's a fantastic entry point into the world of text adventures, if you're interested in that. It's much more accessible, fair and player-friendly than you might think of such a game. It's even more accessible than a lot of graphical point-and-click style adventure games from the time, to be honest. It's well written, the story is interesting and engaging, most puzzles make sense, you meet some cool characters along the way, and the locations you visit are pretty fantastic. When the game is over, you truly feel like you've been on an epic adventure. Really, what more can you ask for? So, that's Frederik Pohl's Gateway. First, there wasn't a video about this game on YouTube, and now there is. Thanks for watching.